be more, go long way for our professional activities. I pray to Ganpati ji first, thereafter Saraswati ji, on behalf of everyone over here. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kuru Me Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Ya Kundendu Tusharhar Dhavala Ya Shubhravastranuta Ya Veena Varadanda Mandit Kara Ya Shveta Padmasana Ya Brahma Chuta Shankara Prabhuti Virdevai Sada Vandita Samam Patu Saraswati Bhagavati Visheshajaryapaha. Hari Om. Jai Jagannath, Jai Jagannath, Jai Jagannath.
Speaker for the session, Karishma Pantulekar. Chairman of the RRC Committee, Paragrit. Advisor, the RRC Committee, Bhavesh Pura. Speaker for the next session, Sri A.K. Samath. My colleagues in the Managing Council of the Chamber, past presidents, and seniors in profession, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to extend a warm welcome at this 30th RRC of the Chamber of Tax Consultants. Puri is well known throughout India as a place of pilgrimage. From time immemorial, and antiquity of this place is well established. Mentions have been found in various religious granthas. In ancient India, religion and learning were very close, intermingled, and each dham was also a center of learning, culture, and religion. Puri, being one of the 4 dhams of the country, was no exception to this tradition. Considering this, RRC and PR committee has planned this learning course at Puri. India is riding high on the early success of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and raft of new business-friendly policies instituted in first 9 months. After badly losing the recent local elections, the next test comes for the government later this month. Government is set to present its full-fledged budget to the Parliament, lay out the agenda for taming chronic deficits while increasing investment, bolstering manufacturing, building modern infrastructure, and passage of crucial legislation. Yesterday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi again reiterated that conducive business environment for domestic as well as foreign players is the prime objective of the government. Amongst the various policies being promoted by the government, making India and ease of doing business are at their heart. But the question always arises whether ease of business, what the government is saying, is really there. They claim that they have initiated various policies in this regard. Recently, Central Board of Direct Taxes has issued draft income computation and disclosure standards and income tax. In case these standards are notified, business houses will have to maintain another set of records to compute the income in accordance with these standards and also a disclosure in the books of accounts, in the financial statements. ICD will unsettle various principles settled by the tax code for many years. On going to the standards, one will also find the flows in the language at various places. Preamble of the standard states that in case the conflict between Income Tax Act and ICD's provisions of Act will prevail, still at times it is seen that ICD try to define some concepts differently than what the similar concepts already defined under the Act. Are the principles which are contrary to the provisions? When they intend to say that when there is conflict, then why this conflict is already been inserted by these proposed standards? Make in India is another thing which is very close to the heart of the government. This will provide not only the opportunities for the business people, with the Make India concept flies not only for the opportunities of business but also to the professionals. We will agree that our tax environment is extremely complex, volatile and uncertain. The manner in taxes levied and administered always lead to litigious position. RRC committee has rightly selected the various papers for this RRC. If you look at the RRC cover and agree, there is a lot to offer in the next few days. It is also gratifying to note that the agenda of the RRC covers a wide range of interesting items related to recent happenings in the world of taxation. One may wonder why we all come to RRC. I can explain the one anecdote. There was a salesman, he knocks the door and enters the house. Then he opens it, he enters. As soon as he enters the room, he had the powder with him, he spreads it over the floor. He says that if our vacuum cleaner doesn't cleanse it clearly, I will myself eat all of the powder which has been cleared over the floor. He goes on saying about his product, and the lady in the house, she was listening, and once he stops there, he asked, "Can I give you white sauce or red sauce to eat this powder?" The man was wondering why she says. Then she says that there is no electricity in the house. One of the stories is that the RRC equips the participants not only with right skills, but also the right knowledge and the right time to apply that knowledge. Discussion with RRC would effectively benefit the participants to set themselves ready for various complexities and keep identifying effective way of transformations in the context. It is the opportune time to renew context, discuss problems of the mutual interest with the delegates. Before I hand over the proceedings further to RRC Chairman Parag, I once again welcome you all to the podium and wish you will be enjoying your participation in this 20th RRC. Thank you.
Theme of our RRC this year is Swachhatan, Swachhaman and Swachh Bharat. Mahatma Gandhi dreamt of an India which was not only free but also clean and developed. He secured freedom for Mother India. Now it is our duty to serve the Mother India by keeping the country neat and clean. We at Chamber take this pledge that we will remain committed towards cleanliness and in your time for this. I believe that the countries of the world that appear clean are so because their citizens don't indulge in littering, nor do they allow it to happen. With this firm belief, we all at CTC will propagate the message of Swachh Bharat Mission throughout the country and encourage other persons also to take this pledge. I am confident that every step we take towards cleanliness will help in making our country clean. It is said that cleanliness of body, Swachhatan, will ensure a healthy life. Purity of mind, which is Swachhaman, will lead to purity of soul. In clean country, if there is Swachh Bharat, will provide the positive environment for it. Keeping in mind this theme, for Swachhatan, the resort has yoga sessions in the morning, and they will also be serving you health issues. For Swachhaman, our DJY is going to organize a bhajan session on Saturday early morning. It is duty of all of us to keep Swachh Bharat. Apart from studies, RRC is popular for entertainment and other activities. We will have informal karaoke sessions tonight, sightseeing of Konark and famous Konark, the famous Sun temple, and Puri temple tomorrow, followed by Antakshari after dinner. Be prepared for surprises as we may have strong and new participants. On Saturday evening, we will have gala dinner with Ghazal program. We also have our famous RRC newsletter, Chai Ke Saath, which will be delivered to you daily. I would not like to take much of your time. Team RRC is here to make your stay comfortable and memorable. If there are any issues, please do not hesitate to contact any of us. With these words, I now invite dignitaries on the dais and Shri A.K. Sagar for lighting the lamp. Now we start with the first session. Now before we start, we request Mr. Sabat and the group leaders for the first paper to have a briefing and along with the group members, to briefing at the boardroom which is behind the reception. So they can proceed. session is Ms. Karishma Khatarkar. She is a partner with KPMG, and I think all of you know her. She is a chartered accountant, CPA, and also a member of the chamber. I think her detailed resume is presented here, so I am not repeating it. May I request Paras Sawala to present a momentum to Karishma.
Good evening. It's working, right? I think some problems with the mic. Is it working? Okay, good evening. So thank you again CBC for giving me this opportunity. It's my first RRC with CBC. Though it's the 38th one, I think I'll take the qualifying. So though it's the 38th one for all of you, maybe not all of you, but some of you. I think Sharma ji was mentioning to me that this concept was started some years back, RRC, and the first RRC he was mentioning everybody came in a coat and a tie and they were professionally dressed, and then they dropped this idea of being so professional and letting it be an informal atmosphere. So actually, this being my first one, I was actually prepared to be in a coat and all, like normal. But then good that I spoke to him, and then I decided to not get into my formal wear. So I look forward to, unfortunately, the 1 year back, Paras actually invited me for this, and I was very happy that it was in Puri. Because Jagannath Puri is something that you would always desire to go with your, and I had actually planned this entire thing thinking that I will get my family here. My mom was very excited 1 year back when I accepted this. And what happened is in December, there was a close family wedding that got organized. And that starts today, all the functions. So then I told Paras that, it's impossible, my paper was going to be on 28th. And it's like my dear sister, kind you can say. Then he kindly preponed it to 19th. Thanks, Paras. And since 2 days, my mom was actually trying to convince me that please don't go. She was feeling bad that I was going without her. But I think as Parag said, it's in destiny. I think it's only my Lord who can decide who should come and who should not. I yet hope that I can have a darshan tonight. So with that note, I would like to start my session on domestic transfer pricing. This is a subject. So this is one subject which was introduced into the Income Tax Act 2 years back. It is yet not being tested in that sense. So the real challenges have not come up, because the real challenges will come up only. The challenges are already coming out. The presentation is not willing to get displayed onto the screen. Yeah, I guess. Anyway, I guess I will start. I think this is the second time it is happening to me in CTC only. Last time was for president. There is some conspiracy.
Jai Jagannath.
Not capitalizing the challenge.
You start with Jai Jagannath.
Yes, Jai Jagannath. So, sorry, now it's not coming on my screen.
You want
Okay, it's okay, it's okay. It's okay. It's fine. Anyway, I think it's more a discussion. This is more meant for. So the way I've structured this session is it's mic is not open.
Okay.
The way I've structured this session is it's more like a technical discussion that I've planned it rather than a presentation. I think by now you've gone through, because I know CTC has organized various sessions on domestic transfer pricing. So I think everybody knows the basics of domestic transfer pricing, and I'm starting with that assumption. So in case you have not got the basics, then that's in my paper also. So in the beginning I try to explain what the law is and then get into the technical discussion. Now, we all know that domestic transfer pricing is actually an extension in that sense. It started from this Glaxo decision, the Supreme Court decision, where this issue of 40A2 was picked up, where it said that if there is a transaction between a profit-making company and a loss-making company, then there can be a tax arbitrage opportunity, even if it is between two domestic related entities. So there can be some bit of tax planning that can happen. So the Supreme Court suggested that why don't you get this in the purview of transfer pricing, because it was not until that time under the purview of transfer pricing. Now there are a couple of things in this, so I have kind of framed some 14 or 15 questions, and I think we can just quickly go through that, because I think that will cover more or less everything as far as what we are facing technical issues when we are advising clients. In case if you have any, there is no clear answer. Let me also tell you here that whatever I would tell you is my view. Right now, there can be a different view, and I would be happy to also know that view from the participants, because that will only help us further strengthen our technical knowledge. So the first thing really that we came across is, we all know that there are two broad categories of domestic. One is under 48 expenditure, and the other is where companies are enjoying some kind of a tax holiday, some kind of an exemption, like either under ATIA or under 10AA or ATA, where either it can be an inter-unit transfer or it can be a transfer from one company to another, one eligible unit in one company to another company having close connection. So this is the broad bucket. Having said that, one question that came to mind is whether transactions with non-residents can fall within the scope of SBT. Because if one reads the wordings of the way section 92BA starts, it says any of the following transaction not being an international transaction. So I just, I have not purposely given answers in that paper because I wanted to make it more interactive. So if you can circulate a mic around in the audience, anybody wants to take a guess on this answer? What is anyone's view here as to whether there can be different views? So anybody to volunteer to say whether transactions with non-resident should fall within SBT?
Voting less than 26%, but more than 20%.
Okay, but why? Because the section 92 says.
International, the definition of international transaction refers to the transaction where the 26% involved.
Right. Okay. But so one thing I would like to now draw attention here is that section 92B1, right, which says, defines that for the purposes of this section, which is international transaction, and section 92CD, it does not talk about 92B1, which talks about international transaction, does not talk about 92BA. So, international transaction is defined only for those sections which are listed in 92B1, right? Then, if it does not cover 92B, A, why should we not want to interpret that 92B says not being an international transaction? So the word international transaction in 92B that they are referring has no connection with 92B1 because there is no link created as per the strict wordings to it. So can you interpret international transactions in general terms to be cross-border transactions? So that was the view that got originated when this entire confusion started. And therefore there are two views here. There is one set of view that believes that 92B A, the words used international transaction have no linkage into 92B1 and therefore they can be read independently. However, what we have advised is what you have said, that you should basically cover between 20 and 26%, and that too only expenditure will get covered. Because here now again we are talking about only 48, and 48 talks only about expenditure. So incomes between 20 and 26% will not be covered. So this is the view we have advised clients, where we say that on a conservative basis it's better to cover it. Because otherwise you could also have penalty implication. But yes, if one wants to go for the pure technical reading of the law, one can take a view that it's not covered.
What about director?
Director again will not be covered.
Non-resident director will not be.
And again I think this view has also been emphasized in para 4A of the Institute Guidance Note also. So the Institute Guidance Note has also done some discussion on similar lines, that it is better on a conservative basis to report this. The second question is that for the purposes of STD, while examining specified person for section 48(2)(b), whether indirect shareholding also needs to be covered. So, is it correct to say that section 48(2)(b) does not use the phrase directly or indirectly, as used in section 92(a) or B, which defines associated enterprise for the purpose of international transaction? Also, the use of the term beneficial owner in section 48(2)(b) denotes real owner of shares and not nominee owner. Thus, indirect shareholding should not be considered. So, this is one thing. Second is, indirect shareholding should be considered in light of Circular 6P of 1968. So, there was a circular which was issued earlier, which was in the context of downstream subsidiaries, where they used the word, where they interpreted the word beneficial ownership. Because in that circular, what they said is, in case of downstream subsidiaries, indirect holding will get covered. So there is one view which gets developed where it says, based on the circular, that indirect holding gets covered. However, if you go by the pure technical reading of the law, because the law of course overrides any circular, right? So what position even the Institute Guidance Note has stated is the same. To say that if you look at the law, then the law really does not cover indirect and only direct should be considered. Now here a very practical thing is required to be looked at, in terms of what is the position that you have been taking for tax audit also. Because if in your tax audit, for years if you have been conservatively taking indirect holding, then it is better to take it for transfer pricing because otherwise you will have penalty implications. But definitely the guidance note para 16(4)(a) says that you should not cover. So this is the view around indirect shareholding. Is there a different view anybody has in this room that indirect should be covered? Okay. So, but there can always be a clarificatory amendment that can come in once the domestic transfer pricing assessments start next year. Whether for the third question, whether for the purpose of section 40A(2)(b, the relationship must exist at the time of entering into the transaction or at any time during the year. So, what is the view here? Please, anybody from the audience? Sorry? At any time during the year.
Logically, it should be at the time of transaction.
Logically, it should be at the
Time of transaction.
at the time of transactions. Okay. Why that logic?
Only at that time, the requirement known. The provisions will apply. So,
What does the law say? So, what is the wording of the law? Let me read it to you. So, the law says that in case of a company, a person shall be deemed to have substantial interest in a business or profession or company if such person is a beneficial owner of shares, not being shares entitled to fixed rate of dividend, whether with or without right, carrying not less than 20% of voting power, comma, at any time during the previous year. So the words that the section say is that at any time during the previous year. So which means in our situation 1, if XYZ Limited and the consultant were independent, sorry, in situation 2, if A Limited got holding of more than 20% after the transaction took place, that transaction will still be covered. However, in situation 1, the question is not of shareholding, it is of director. And the wording as far as the director goes under the law is that he is a director. So which means that when the transaction is happening, if he is not a director, then that will not get covered. So in this case, except for relationships falling under ownership, relationship must exist at the time of transaction for triggering SPV provisions. So if it is relating to this 20% substantial interest ownership, then it can be any time during the year because that is how the law, the wording is. The next issue is whether section 48(2) can be invoked to disallow discount in selling price. So your trade discount, you know. So what is the view there? Again, I'd like to hear from the audience first. Whether this will be covered?
no, trade discount.
Okay, a reason?
No, it is not a transaction at all. The ultimate transaction is in FW.
It is not an expenditure.
It is not a expenditure. Correct, correct. So the wordings again of 48(2) says whether assessee incurs any expenditure in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made. So that is the word. Expenditure where payment has been made or is to be made. So therefore trade discount will not get covered. There are also case laws which cover this position under the erstwhile 48(2). In the case of Grand Prix Fab and United Exports, both are Delhi Tribunal case laws. Grand Prix says clearly that trade discount to sister company does not get covered under 48(2). And United Exports basically says that the amount actually spent is what should be considered, and therefore trade discount will not be considered. So these two positions are important. Now, of course, this is as far as trade discount goes, but in other kinds of discounts like cash discount, you know, one can take the view that it may get covered. The next interesting issue issue, and this is actually we deliberate. This is very interesting. Till date, we are yet deliberating this issue. Now that depends on your accounting treatment, right? Because if it's shown as a separate expenditure for which you have claimed a reduction, then that can get covered, right? Yeah, but whether one can say not paying, because you are supposed to pay 100 and you got a discount, you accounted for it. So you claimed an expenditure. Yeah, when if you say that, one can also say that there is actually no, but okay, then one can say in respect of which payment has been made or is to be made, then that also it cannot be made.
It is surely an expenditure.
It is surely an expenditure.
But then it is not a gain.
Yeah. Cash discount is a grey area.
It's a deemed payment. Yeah, most of them.
Yeah, it's a grey area. I will depends.
The same logic can be applied to turnover discount also.
Yeah.
Not the great discount, but the turnover discount. When you achieve certain turnover, the supplier gives you the discount.
So he gives you money back.
Yeah.
Sorry,
It's
you-
getting adjusted against the payment.
But then again, you go by the same logic, right? Where there's,
Exactly, definitely.
yeah, there will be no. Yeah, so capital expenditure, whether capital expenditure will be covered. No. Why? The word 92B says any expenditure, right? It does not distinguish revenue or capital in nature. So when you are purchasing a capital asset from a related party,
It will amount to disbursement, not an expenditure. It is going to create an asset. It is the disbursement of the money and it's going to be capitalized.
but this I think disbursement expenditure includes disbursements, right?
Good. But nevertheless, it is not going to be debited as an expenditure in the profit loss.
No, depreciation is the depreciation. Sorry?
That is allowance.
Okay.
That is allowance, not
Right.
expense.
So that is the view that evolves. That because depreciation, so there is an expenditure that's getting debited because of the capital expense, but it's not an expenditure, it is an allowance, and therefore it should not be covered. So that is again the view that has been supported by the Institute Guidance Note also. However, if it is an expenditure which is being fully claimed in that year, like you do scientific research and you incur and it has been completely claimed in that year, then that will get covered. That is the institute view again. So because there the question is that it is not an allowance, right? Because there you are fully claiming that expenditure. If you are incurring R&D expenditure, you decide that you want to claim it in the same year fully, then that gets covered. Another issue in this is what should be the position adopted for reporting capital expenditure transactions in accountant's report. So here again there are two views. I will read out the view that the Institute Guidance Note Para 11 says. It says that these provisions are also applicable to expenditures which are capital in nature and fully claimed as deduction under other provisions. Example 35 280, 35, 3580, etc. Since any expenditure is covered under the scope of section 48 Hence it appears that the guidance note also requires only capital expenditure fully claimed as deduction in a financial year to be treated as ST. So as far as reporting is concerned, this is the view taken by the institute. guidance note, of course. Now, whether the next question is whether expenditure can be disallowed by the assessing officer under 48 even when the STT of assessing is at arm's length price. So, once you establish that that expenditure between related parties is at arm's length, right? Can the assessing officer, even if it is at arm's length, disallow this expenditure? No? Should not is a good thing to know. Whether can he? Okay. So here the view is different slightly, because if you see 48 to A, there are three circumstances. Okay, one is where the assessing officer can make an adjustment or a disallowance. Where the opinion of AO the expenditure is excessive or unreasonable having regard to the fair market value of the good, or where the opinion of the AO the expenditure is not legitimate need of business, or there is no benefit derived or by or accruing to the assessee. So if you really see 40A to A, subclause A, there are three conditions. It's not only about fair market value. One, second is whether it is legitimate, and third is whether there is a benefit derived. So even if it is at arm's length, because there are a lot of legal decisions that have come of late on transfer pricing in High Court, like you have the EKL Appliance High Court decision on the issue of royalty, right? Which says that the TPO cannot get into commercial jurisprudence, cannot determine whether royalty is required to be paid or not. TPO's job is only to determine arm's length. So having done that, that's it. Then he cannot say that whether that benefited or not benefited. But the assessing officer has that right. So therefore, it is not necessary that if the fair market value is determined and the STT is as per the fair market value, the AO may not disallow the expenditure. There can only be a situation where if in your transfer pricing documentation, because see when you determine fair market value, what you need to do? You need to do a functional analysis, right? In any kind of transfer pricing, even for STT. So when you are doing the functional analysis, if you have established the benefit and need test and it is documented, then his job will become tougher. However, if you have restricted to only benchmarking that transaction but not done a thorough functional analysis about that transaction, then the AO has some loopholes to basically disallow. So it is important that your documentation around STT is also equally strong, like the way you do any international transaction, functional analysis and all. The next interesting issue is whether clause 1 of section 92BA is applicable to expenditure claimed as deduction under the head income from other sources. So what is the view here? Yes. I think this is the simple part, right? I don't think I need to explain this. Let me explain why this doubt had come. So there was a example where there was a lease and sublease. So company had actually got some property on rent which was not fully utilized, and for that time when they were not fully utilizing it, they subleased it. So in the original case, they were paying rent to the related parties. So company A subleasing to company B, which are related. Company B was paying rent. Company B further subleased to some third party. C and was charging rent. So when doing that computation, that rent came under income from other sources and they were claiming expenditure. Again, so what is sublease rent? Again, the sublease rental income, it was claiming the expenditure that it was paying to its related party. And it was claimed. So there the assessee was trying to take a view that because this is expenditure, the section comes under the profits and gains of business and profession. You know, the 48 section per se. Therefore, for other income from other sources, it should not apply. However, if you see the extract of 58(2), section 58(2), it clearly says that the provisions of section 48 shall, so far as may be applied, computing the health income also apply. So 58(2), section 58(2) makes it very clear. So this is one live example which I come to with what we will share. Then the next question is, for which period are the provisions of SGT applicable for tax holiday unit undertaking? Now this is an interesting question again that got posed in a live situation. Is assessee was claiming, there were two business units and business 1 was eligible for profit linked deduction under 80IA and business 2 was not eligible for any profit. Now during that year, which is financial year 12-13, the assessee had inter-unit transfer of goods from business 1 to business 2. So it was from one eligible to non-eligible unit, amounting to 6 crores. So it was more than 5 crores also. Although the assessee was entitled to profit linked tax deduction for business 1, the assessee had not claimed any deduction for that business in that year. So whether in such case, inter-unit transfer of goods can be covered. Because see, ultimately if you are not claiming a deduction, then there can be no tax arbitrage situation. Right? So whether, then what stand would be? So what would you have advised your client in this case? Whether he should cover it in SGT or not cover it? Line 2. Yes, no, at least guess, yeah. No, yes? No? Then every year you will look like that. Means it is covered, it is not covered, claiming, not claiming.
Maybe, maybe not.
Sorry, maybe. There were 3 views. In our organization also 3 partners gave 3 views. One said that in perpetuity. So even if the eligible unit period is over, once it has claimed, it has been an eligible unit in perpetuity, if such a transaction comes, you should report an SGT. That was one view. Second view was full 15 to 20 years of eligibility or expiry of tax liability period, whichever is earlier, should be considered. So that entire, at least that eligibility period. And the third view was that only the years in which tax holiday has been availed. So you look at it year to year, you should consider it. So finally then we had taken it to our tax technical group, which we call TTG. And they said that view 2 is more appropriate, which means that at least for that period for which that eligibility is there, you should cover it. Because if the wording talk about eligible unit, non-eligible. It's not about whether you actually claim, right? You have that eligibility. And this is, it meets the purposive rule of interpretation, at least. So that was what view was taken.
Is it not reporting versus adjustments to be made? Something like that. Out of abundant portion, you report the transaction. But since you are not claiming any tax exemption, you don't make any adjustment yourself.
So you are saying you should report it,
Yeah.
but you don't do benchmarking. But then it's all the more, because see, then you will not have non-reporting penalty, but then you will have non-maintaining of documentation penalty, because you are in that
tax arbitrage.
Yeah. So this is one another interesting thing about tax arbitrage. You know, we, all of us, at least, till I think 1 year back, even I used to feel that the domestic transfer pricing one should go in lobby, right? Okay, only tax arbitrage situation should be covered.
Yeah.
But you imagine, so I was just thinking one day, and I have had this discussion with Rohan, of course, and he does not agree to it, but I was one day just having this discussion with him that, you know, we all are saying we should go to the government and lobby this, but how will the accountants report? That means, I was saying, so up till now there has been no accountant who has reported 99% who says that it is not an arm's length. Correct? So that means it will be the job of the accountant in all cases to find whether there is tax arbitrage or no. So tax arbitrage can also come from a situation where you could have two different effective tax rates, not necessarily tax paying, non-tax paying, profit making, loss making, right? You could be in a situation where you could have different effective tax rates. Now, how will you determine that as an accountant? It will become very difficult. So while idealistically we will like that position, practically it will not be possible for the government to monitor it. See, the job, the whole purpose of this accountant's report is to give that listing to the government so that they can do scrutiny. Now, there will be no accountant who will report that there is tax arbitrage.
But there should be a job that do audit, but adjustment should be made only where there is tax arbitrage. The SSC and the department audit can stay. The reporting can stay.
Okay. Yeah, so that can be a suggestion. That you don't do an adjustment if there is no tax arbitrage, but you do report it. That is what, so when, and which is what I understand, I think Chambers has also gone back to lobby and they said no, they will not make any changes in domestic transfer pricing. Is the view, because we had gone to some other association and they told us the same view, that domestic transfer pricing we are not going to touch. But one thing they said is that, is what you are saying, that you report, even managerial remuneration, right, is a big challenge. Before anybody asks me this question, what to do about managerial remuneration, I am only telling that even I don't have an answer to this. So you have to report. And but I like what Paras told me in the lunchtime. He said that you can compare the managerial remuneration with Mukesh Ambani's salary, but you will always be an arm's length. So if that is possible, then that was on a lighter note, of course. Follow TNM. Yeah, so that is what it is. So the point is, what the government said is that the TPOs will be instructed this, that where there is no tax arbitrage, please don't unnecessarily tamper with it. Like the shared transaction issue, there has been internally a lot of heated discussion that has happened, where, you know, just because of the whims and fancy of one TPO, the whole government was trying to justify Vodafone's share valuation decision, share premium decision, right? At the end of the day, only lawyers and accountants made money in this. So, and Vodafone, of course, continues to do their business because, you know, they have a sound technical position. So it's something that, so they are very careful now. The new government is extra careful and they are hoping that domestic TV gets implemented in the way you're saying. Windows is not genuine, it is.
Best way to represent it, ease of business. Kindly.
Ease
of business. Kindly.
Kindly remove this.
Ease of doing the business in India.
Yeah.
Not a domestic.
So I will tell you on a lighter note, now that you have shared this. We as transfer pricing professionals are very specialized, right? So we always have this fear. I always have this fear because I have not done tax for how many years. That is why I got into litigation very lately to start doing some corporate tax. But what if Narendra Modi one day decides that transfer pricing 2 years, nothing going? You know, everybody has a freehold to do anything. Then what will we do? Then I'll tell you, when we started transfer pricing in 2001, into this is because being a woman, I thought that it will be only one November end, right? There will be not much pressure. You just have to file this compliance and it will be easy and stuff. Then that is how it started. So my mom was very happy at that stage. That time I was not married. I used to only go late format in the months of September, October and November. All other months I used to work normal life. Then assessment started. So then that pressure built up, right? So then there was November end and then there was December end. That came because TP assessment had a different whatever. Then there was DRP. So that was DRP end. So that was January end. Then there was APS came. So there was February and March end. So now every time, because like I have a daughter also and my mom takes care of her, and every time I tell her this is a month end, you know. So tell me which month do you not have a month end, you know? So with domestic TP, I am sure the balance of May, June, July months also will go away. It will be good for us. As I said, unless otherwise you Mr. Narendra Modi things other way around, and we will all be forced to go into a sabbatical break. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Whether inter-unit, sorry, did I answer this? Yeah. Whether inter-unit transfer of goods or services between two eligible units undertaking by the assessee is covered within the scope of STD. Between two eligible units, because the word uses from one eligible unit to another unit. Now, if it is between two eligible units, whether it will be covered? Yes, I think this is very simple, so we will not spend time on this. Because the other business unit could be eligible or non-eligible, not necessarily eligible. Whether inter-unit cost allocation is to be reported. Now, this is a very important question. Because there is a lot of confusion on this question, and all the big fours have taken a different view in this. What is the view here that you have? Inter-unit cost allocation. So, common, you have this common management cost, finance, IT cost of a company which has to be allocated between different business units, between eligible, non-eligible, whether it will be covered. Should be?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any one who should be covered? Then it's very simple here. Then I think we all are thinking too much. So the wordings to be looked at in this case is section 80 IA 8, subclause 8 says where any goods or services held for the purposes of eligible businesses transferred. So, are common cost goods or services transferred? No, right? It is not goods or services. In the context of certain case laws also defined under 80 IA 8. These are these case laws under which say that it has to be a marketable good and service. So therefore, it should not be covered. So here again, different people have taken different positions. So some people have taken a position it should be covered. Some have taken a position it should not be covered at all. Some have taken a position that you disclose a note, but don't include it in that total. When you do the form 3CP, the total value, don't include it there, but just put it in your notes. Because in case if the tax authority takes a view that it can, because see, actually if you see logically, tax arbitrage is possible with this.
Actually possible.
Because your common cost overhead you can allocate to whichever unit which is not basically which is earning high profits.
In fact, there is a professional organization, and if one CEO of that unit wants it, actually I am being charged higher amount. If his performance is linked to his whatever you do, there could be a proper arm's length meaning between even as the roof of one company.
Right.
In a way, it is purely service only. Then it takes the character of service itself.
Right.
then I will say that, instead of paying X amount, I am getting it at X minus of X amount something. Why should I pay you X? There's clear possibility.
That is one view. So here again there is no clear answer. But this is an issue to be looked at. And what are you doing in the case of your clients? And it's important that you at least inform the clients that there can be different views and finally let them make a call. Whether intercompany cost allocations to be recovered with or without markup, I think it's the same thing. So, even it doesn't matter whether so here again the view, the reason for the question is because if it's with the markup, then it takes the form of a service because you are adding a profit. So that is why there is no justification to say that okay, you should cover it if it's with markup. However, if it's without markup, then at least one can take a view to say that it's only a cost center and it's an allocation. And then there is no, it's not a good service.
Can one earn from one cell? If there be a markup, have you come across practical situation where there is a markup? There's a common overheads. I don't think you will be.
At least in inter-unit transfers, it does not happen. But however, in case of closely connected companies, it won't happen. Different group entities, it can happen.
So markup would justify basically in case of intercompany transactions.
Yes, in case of intercompany, the markup would be cheaper. See, but here again another view is, if you look at it from an expenditure perspective, not charging a markup would mean not excessive. However, if you are talking from the perspective of eligible unit to another company, closely connected company, then markup has to be applied.
So based on situations.
Correct. Here one more interesting situation has come for an IT company. Where bench cost. So you have common bench cost, right, which does not get allocated to any unit. So there, at least I took the view that it should get covered because bench is ultimately your people who are going to render services, right? So the bench are your actual chargeable employees. So in that sense, can you say that it is good services, marketable services? But bench has a value. So on a conservative basis, at least I have taken a view that it should be covered.
There should be something element of services availed. In case of bench, there is no availment of availing of.
So bench you don't know, right? What at bench at any point in time could be utilized, could not be utilized.
But unless I utilize, in case of other things, shared services or some accounting or IT or IT, actually I have utilized, I have availed the service.
Right.
In case of bench, services are not utilized at all. Therefore, that could be a different perspective.
Okay. So, but what were the cost of opportunity? In the sense, if those employees were utilized, they are all chargeable resources for me. So, in an independent situation, I would have anyway incurred. See, it's another thing that because I am as a company incurring a bench cost, right? But let's assume if I was independent eligible unit and independent non-eligible unit, I would have to, from a service or a business perspective, need to incur those expenses.
Yeah.
So from that logic,
Okay.
anyway, but your view is also possible. Okay. The next question is for invoking section 80IA10, which is transaction should take place with closely connected. The term closely connected has not been defined anywhere in the Act. So, what interpretation should one take for this particular closely connected? Should it be only restricted to the same group companies, or can you take the view that because there are case laws, so there are some prefer case laws like in the case of Sun, OPG and Western, which are one is Gujarat, one is Chennai, one is Hyderabad Tribunal, where they say that under closely connection would mean companies belonging to the same group. So there are some case laws there. However, if you look at the broad, so there was a recent decision in the case of A.T. Kearney, which had come out. There it said that you should basically draw inference upon 40A2B, section 92A and accounting standard 80. So if it gets covered under any one of these, then it can be considered to be closely connected. So that was a decision, that was a Delhi tribunal decision, A.T. Kearney. The next issue is if a eligible unit undertaking of the assessee has made payments to specified persons under section 48(2)A of the Act, which is found to be excessive by applying STT, whether the AO can enhance the income of the eligible unit undertaking by disallowing the excess, and can the AO refuse to grant tax holiday on such enhanced income by relying on the first provision of section 92C(4). So what is your view here? So here, if you suo motu make the adjustment on your own, then you can be protected. So there are also decisions in this case, in the case of SB Builders and Zenith Rubber, which are again Mumbai tribunal decisions, which clearly lay out this particular principle. Last couple of issues. A holding company A. So after actually discussing my issue, I'll hold open for any questions that you have. So here the issue is a holding company A has a subsidiary eligible for 10 AA benefits. Are all transactions between holding company and subsidiaries covered under SJT? Form 3CB has specific paragraphs on various SPTs. Under which paragraph of the Form 3C would the transaction be disclosed? So you have Part C of the Form 3CB, which is dedicated for SPT, and you have Clause 22, which is for 48(2)B. You have Clause 23, which is for APIA 8, and then you have Clause 24, which is for APIA 10, and Clause 25 for others. So depending on, in case of a 10 AA unit, you can either report all transactions under that. You need not double report. So you need not report it in 48(2) and then again report it in 10. So if you are reporting it in 48(2), then you need not report expenditure portion in 10 AA. So you just have to be careful, because we have seen situations where you will double report. Your 5 crore threshold has to be exceeded only once. You can't consider it all cases and then say that it's exceeded and therefore STT applies. Then the next question is, A Limited has a power undertaking unit located at Chennai eligible for deduction under APIA of the Act. Some portion of power generated by the unit is captively consumed at the cement unit at Chennai and balance is supplied to state electricity board at a lower rate. Then so here the issue is whether the rate at what is the rate at which electricity is supplied, so that rate which it is supplying to the government under the SCB, whether the AO can consider that rate and say that whatever stays is excessive.
So interunit companies that higher rate.
Yeah. Because the balancing, the SCB rate is governed by the government, right? It's not in your hand. And there are these case laws which clearly define and say that okay, if it is controlled by a particular act or something, then you cannot apply that for the purposes of to see whether it is fair market value. So in that case, I don't think you need to be afraid of the fact that the AO can actually treat it as excessive in nature. Of course, now there is a safe harbor also recently introduced for this government electricity companies. That if you follow the rate under that Electricity Act, then they don't need to maintain any documentation. So in case if you have any clients which are state electricity companies, then you can apply safe harbor. And the last question is, this is actually not domestic transfer pricing, but it is domestic transaction. So whether transaction illustrated below between two resident parties. So here, you have this concept of deemed international transaction under section 92(b)(2). Earlier, what it used to cover is that if there is a transaction between the Indian company and that other third-party enterprise, one of the entities had to be outside India. So one of it has to be, non-resident. However, when the amendment came in last year, they said that even resident will get covered in such a situation. So domestic transaction per se can also now get covered under your normal international transaction rule. Where you can have, and these are generally global supply agreements. So for example, if your overseas subsidiary, overseas parent company has negotiated a global supply agreement to purchase raw materials from vendor A and determine the terms and substance, and that global supplier has a company in India who supplies the raw materials to the Indian company, that transaction can get covered because under this deemed international transaction now, section 92(b). That's it. No questions? You missed?
I don't see the
I
record.
had to finish it at dot time, right?
Yes.
Because all of you are tired after the Air India journey. I was just sharing a joke that had I been on Air India, maybe your flight may not have got delayed because till now, till date, my track record with Air India has been pretty good.
We were thinking that only. We thought if you were there, you would have taken the benefit over there only.
No, but then it has not got delayed only.
Yeah, we would have.
I was assuming. And we have also been unlucky this time. It was the unluck of so many people. Okay, thank you. And I don't have the opportunity to interact with you in the coming days because I am going to leave tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. But however, I look forward to catching up with you guys on dinner, hopefully. Thanks.
Is 20% voting power.
Yeah.
Is 20% voting power in case of TA2. Equal and ensure share holding would be treated as two, and the person in income tax act with 2,000 different.
Sorry, I
I'm having the 90% share holding in a particular company, 15% I'm holding in my individual capacity, and 15% I'm holding in my HO.
Right.
And the person, both are the separately recognized under income tax act.
Yeah.
And both are having less than 20% illegally. Whether it is going to be treated as less than 20 or more than 20.
I think you will get covered because there is something which says if you are a director in a substantial.
I'm not a director. I'm talking about that simply the shareholder. And having the shareholding and voting power less than 20% person. And both are separate entities in person.
Then you will not get covered. Because then you are holding less than, you are holding 20% in one.
15.
person?
HUF and individual.
The Companies Act does not recognize Karta separately, whereas the Income Tax Act recognizes Subkarta as a separate SSC.
Correct.
So now, whether that would be treated, that's his question.
No. I don't think
What would be the evidence of indirect holding? How would you control?
What would be the relevance of
Subject of indirect control.
indirect holding?
Yes, indirect control. How would it be practically?
So indirect holding is something which we have taken it is not covered. Because the wording of the law says beneficial owner, which means you are real owner, not the nominee holder. Indirect holder is not a real owner, the nominee holder.
Especially in case of holding by a trust, through a trust.
Through a trust,
I am controlling the share through the trust.
because then that is a pass through, right? So that would get covered.
Any other questions? I have a request to propose.